Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you...
Hey there, and welcome to Self-Inflicted Oral Nostalgia, the Guided by Voices podcast, every GBV LP, every 2 weeks. Today we'll be taking a look at the band's third record from 2012, The Bears for Lunch. But first, all music heard in this podcast is played and owned by Guided by Voices. Any reviews or materials cited are owned by their respective creators. And of course, all hail Jeff Warren's Guided by Voices database located at gbvdb.com. Visit everygbvlp.com to subscribe to future episodes or to listen to past episodes of this podcast. And write to me if you want with complaints, comments, or corrections at jeff@everygbvlp.com. Now let's get to the show. So there's a scene very early in Apocalypse Now where Martin Sheen wakes up and he's hungover in a cheap hotel, and after he casts a glance around his meager surroundings and slowly realizes where he is, he thinks to himself, Saigon, shit, I'm still only in Saigon. Well, that's kind of how I'm feeling about 2012, since I've been talking about the same year for 3 goddamn episodes. The Bears for Lunch, GBV's 18th record, and the one we'll be talking about today, came out in November of 2012. Class Clown Spots a UFO had come out just that past June, and Let's Go Eat the Factory kicked off the year in January. And by the way, that was just the GBV stuff that was released. Bob also released 2 solo records, Mouseman Cloud in April and Jack Sells the Cow in September. Every other month, it seemed, Pollard was putting out something new, and thanks to the internet, you could have it delivered right to your door. So being into Bob in 2012 was more like subscribing to a magazine than being into a musician. And because this ended up being one of Pollard's most prolific years, before we start to talk about The Bears for Lunch as an LP, let's talk for a second about just how productive Bob is. And because it's such a big topic, I'm actually going to break it into 2 subjects. In this episode, I'll talk about why I think Pollard makes as much stuff as he does, and in the next episode, I'll talk about what this means as a fan. So to start off, we all know Bob's prolific. In fact, as suggested by the website Impose, Robert Pollard might very well have surpassed the definition of prolific. They want to go even farther, proposing that his last name become a noun, which they define as one who ages with grace and continued inventiveness while expanding beyond all previous understandings of prolificacy. For example, this year he became a true Pollard of the art rap scene. And while I think that's a perfectly cromulent noun, I want to take a few minutes to try and get at what's behind Bob's prolific nature. For me, the key to Pollard's work ethic lay in the fact that he was into sports before he was into music, at least in terms of music being his main pursuit. Because of this, he approaches songwriting from the point of view of an athlete more than as an artist. And in terms of his sports career, he was pretty serious. At Dayton's Northridge High School, Bob excelled at basketball, baseball, and football. This included being both a star pitcher and quarterback. His participation in sports continued when he went to college at Wright State University. In fact, he pitched the school's first ever no-hitter in 1978. As Bob said in an interview with ESPN, in addition to the no-hitter in college, I threw 11 others between the ages of 10 and 20. It must have been in the Pollard blood because Bob's brother Jim was also a star athlete. His main sport was basketball, averaging 36 points a game in his senior year of high school. He also holds the single-game scoring record in Dayton with an astounding 57 points. Both Bob and Jim have been inducted into their high school Hall of Fame. Beyond what must have been their own natural ability, Bob and Jim were encouraged to play sports by their father, Pollard saying, "My dad had high aspirations for us to have a career in one of the sports that we played at the high school level, baseball, football, or basketball." And while Bob later said that his dad's interest in their sports careers was mainly financial, Pollard saying his father had dollar signs in his eyes, there's no doubt that as a large family growing up in the Midwest in the 60s and 70s, sports was just something that was in the air. Whether it was played at the professional, college, or amateur level, sports was something that was part of everyone's lives. Music, by contrast, was something that Pollard didn't get serious about until college, and this was only after, due to an injury with his arm, it became apparent he wasn't going to have a career in sports. That's when he learned to play guitar and started writing songs. And what I think happened at that point is that he approached picking up a guitar the same way that he approached picking up a bat. It was less about artistic inspiration than it was just swinging and trying to hit something. For example, take a look at the opening lyrics to the song Keep It Coming, which was a 2002 B-side of Everywhere with Helicopter. Pollard writes, "What's more important, the run or the finish?" Based on the rest of the song and Pollard's subsequent career, I think his answer would be that the run itself, the pure act of being in the race and getting out there and trying, is more important than where you actually finish or even if you get to the finish line. That's why guys like Cal Ripken Jr. are so celebrated, not necessarily for being the best players, but by getting out there and playing every time, no matter what the result of any particular game might be. What's important is suiting up for battle and heading out onto the field. It might be raining, but you play. You might be in pain, but you play. You may even lose, but at least you tried. So when Pitchfork writes that Pollard's prolific output can be read as an obsessive quest to master the art of songwriting, I think that's total bullshit. Same as when it says that Pollard's been in pursuit of the perfect song for 30 years. There's no doubt in my mind that when Pollard looks at something like Have a Jug from the record we're discussing, he doesn't think, hey, one step closer to the perfect song. Because he knows that the perfect song, just like the perfect painting or perfect book or even the perfect chocolate chip cookie, doesn't exist. Instead, what matters is getting out there and trying each and every day. You don't always win, but that's not the point. Then again, sometimes you pitch no-hitters. And that's why I think Pollard's written so many songs, not to mention it's why they sometimes contain so many mistakes. Because any sport by its very nature is somewhat erratic, sloppy, and unpredictable. In fact, that's kind of the allure, right? If we wanted choreography, we'd go to the theater. Every game is different. Each stadium has its own quirks. Every time you play, any number of things can happen, and all you can do is react in the moment and hope for the best. It's instinctual. There's no time to think. And that's the way Pollard puts down his songs. In Bob's mind, you can no more plan out where your song goes than you can know whether or not you're going to make a free throw or throw a strike. You just get out there and try. And so if Pollard writes a song and it's 30 seconds long, then that's the song. Or if it's 4 minutes, then that's the song. And if it also happens to sound amazing, that's great. Or if it sounds like crap, that's fine too. He doesn't sweat the details, he just moves on because the point isn't perfection. The point is playing the game. This means that Bob's interaction with the song is more physical than mental. The mountain of songs he's produced is therefore more of a show of stamina than intellect. And Pollard's pride comes from, to go back to that line and Keep It Coming, not necessarily where he finishes in the race, but simply from the fact that he was in it. This outlook, I would say, is rare in rock and roll. In most cases, musicians get lumped in with writers and painters in terms of being slaves to their muse. They may jump around in concert, but when it comes to writing songs, they slave away in the garret just like all the other tortured artists. But Bob thinks that's silly. His attitude is, you just get out there and do it, because he's treating it like a sport. Pitchers don't wait for inspiration, nor do quarterbacks. Their only muse is to win, and their only chance to do that is to take the field. And that's what Bob's doing every time he picks up a guitar. As he boasts in Jenna Rock's Gray from August by Cake, he's a 40-year starter. It's been almost 5 decades and he's still at it. He goes out there every day, and that's what's important. And that's why I think he's written all those songs. It's also why he's not necessarily hung up on each song sounding perfect. Okay, shifting gears back to The Bears for Lunch, I'm really excited to be talking about this LP because it's not just my favorite of the reunion records, it's one of my all-time favorite GBV albums, period. And the fact that 25 years into their career, GBV was still putting out great music goes a long way toward explaining how and why they have such devoted fans. And since this record sort of capped a kind of 2012 trilogy, a number of publications looked at them as a group and tried to find a common theme or else make some sense of how they fit together. Pitchfork decided, it's clear now that Let's Go Eat the Factory was the weird one, Class Clown Spots a UFO the one with most range, and The Bears for Lunch the flat-out catchiest. The band seemed to agree with this assessment, Tobin Sprout telling an interviewer, I see Factory as an abstract, where Bears and Clown have more of a polished feel. I agree with that idea. Maybe that's why I like this one the best of the reunion records. It indeed has a bunch of catchy songs. The home-recorded lo-fi song snippets of Alien Lanes, which the band tried to recreate for Let's Go Eat the Factory, are nowhere to be found on The Bears for Lunch. Instead, the LP is a collection of some really great pop songs, with both Pollard and Sprout continuing to turn in great tunes. Reviewers seem to agree. Website Prefix wrote, with their third album of the year, The Bears for Lunch, Guided by Voices is all the way back. It's the best record of this trilogy of new records, and also manages to top Pollard's great solo stuff from this year. Stereo Gum, making the same point as a number of reviews around the time of the reunion LPs, wrote that the secret weapon here, as is often the case, is Tobin Sprout, who brings his psychedelia flirtations to full fruition on The Corners Are Glowing, and threatens to steal the whole show with the wondrously catchy Led Zeppelin 3 influenced Waving at Airplanes. Website Chunky Glasses said much the same thing. What might be the strongest portion of this lunch meal, and actually the entire catalog of reunion releases, are Sprout's contributions. Having more songs per album in 2012 than he did in 1994, his little ditties really hold it all together and work as a refreshing palate cleanser to Pollard's gristle. Pitchfork gave the record a 7.3, writing that The Bears for Lunch is the most consistent of this year's trifecta, adding, it may not boast an instant, indelible earworm like Class Clown's Keep It in Motion or Factory's Donut for a Snowman, but there are no buzzkill duds like The Big Hat and Toy Show either. Consequence of Sound gave it a C+, writing that The Bears for Lunch is another recommended effort that recalls what the band does best. It's lo-fi with some hi-fi highlighting the in-betweens. The songs are short but sometimes feel epic. Delusions of Adequacy liked the record but wondered what was next. Whether there's enough energy, fraternity, and songs left in the GBV tank to warrant more new material on top of this year's LP trilogy remains to be heard. However, a few reviews took the band to task for releasing so much material in a single year, suggesting that their prodigious output could have been instead curtailed into one all-around classic LP. As Pitchfork put it, you can't help but think the band's re-emergence would be that much more dramatic if they had pared down their 3 2012 releases into one record stacked with the best songs from each. Consequence of Sound struck a similar note, writing, one could argue that just taking the best material the band recorded this year would create a 5-star LP, as opposed to 3 good to very good ones. Website Spectrum had the same thought. It's easy to suggest that GBV should have made one killer record by culling the best tracks from the 3 released over the past 12 months, but that's just not the way Pollard rolls, especially these days. And while I wouldn't go so far as to agree with that idea, I do think, as with most GBV records, each LP could have used some judicious pruning. I'd still prefer 3 albums, but I think each one could have had fewer songs. But that's a small complaint. The band was back, and that's what matters. So now let's look at this LP song by song. The record kicks off with King Arthur the Red.
Cells are crazy in the head. Beatles buried in the red.
This song sounds just amazing. It's a great way to start off the record. And while the first reunion LP saw the band back in their basements, by now they'd essentially returned to the mid-fi sound of the second round of their Matador records. This song even brings Todd Tobias back as an engineer. The subject of King Arthur goes back to Pollard's elementary school days. He said that a lot of the robot, wizard, and elf imagery that was found on B-1000 was because of the stories, tales, and myths he read to his students. Whether or not King Arthur was a real person or just a legend is not really known. And anyway, the song doesn't seem to actually be about King Arthur. In fact, the line about needles buried in the red sounds like it refers to the recording of the song. Either way, it's a really fun track and a great way to start the record. Second song is The Corners Are Glowing. This is the first Tobin Sprout song on the record, and it's a really nice one. And even though it's one of the handful of longer tracks, it's a few seconds over 3 minutes long, the second half of the song is almost purely instrumental, Sprout just letting the music breathe and setting up a really nice groove. Lyrically, I can't really tell what it's about. The fact that there's not much more than a dozen words in the song doesn't help, but it sounds good, so I don't really care. By this point in the reunion, since Tobin no longer lived in Dayton, he was just recording his songs solo, playing all the parts himself. As he said, I send the songs to Bob and that's all I do. It's hard to argue with the results, though I can kind of see how Pollard might have, over time, resented this. I mean, it was one thing when Sprout lived in the same town and they were in the same room together, or Tobin was recording the group on his 4-track. But at this point, Bob was just sort of sticking Sprout's solo songs on GBV records, and since Pollard was hardly lacking in songs of his own, I can see how he would have begun to feel that Tobin's place in the group was not entirely necessary. Plus, the fact that so many reviews were praising Toby's songs over his probably didn't help things. Third song is Have a Jug.
Mr. Mug of Mystery, if you have a history, alright. Have a jug and you will see your new...
This short lo-fi song is okay, and I like to hear Pollard singing against an acoustic guitar, but what's on the record seems like a sketch or demo of what it could have been. In terms of what the song's about, since this is Bob we're talking about, I'll assume that have a jug is basically a synonym for have a drink, the one here being consumed from a rather fancier, maybe it's meant to be archaic, crystal mug. Maybe Pollard's alluding to a historical setting, same as the opening song, King Arthur the Red. The lyrics reinforce the idea that the song's about drinking, Bob writing, "Have a jug and you will see your new personality." And although most people claim, as Pollard seems to do here, that too much alcohol can change a person's behavior or personality, that's actually just a myth. As Esquire magazine put it in an article from 2017, a study published in Clinical Psychological Science shows that there's little switching character between sober and wasted. And although people tend to become more extroverted after drinking, this is just a louder version of their usual nature. So that new personality that Bob's alluding to is actually something that's already there. It just needs a few drinks to bring it out. And just to keep the drinking theme going, meet the hangover child. This is a really great song with some nice drumming, a great bass line, and a sea of guitars. Plus, Pollard's singing with a slight British accent, which is always fun. It's also recorded by former producer Todd Tobias, so it sounds pretty good. Lyrically, the song's more impressionistic than narrative, with Pollard throwing around a bunch of great lines. The bit about checkout lines for the red light sales is a callback to the crass consumerism Bob decried on Useless Inventions. And the bit about burying your nose in the bookends is pretty funny, Bob referencing the world's worst reader. And even though I can't get a clear picture of who or what the hangover child is or what it's meant to represent, Pollard, his fans, Pete Jameson, it's a great track, with Bob promising the character, and you'll not back down, and you'll not fall out. It's a really nice song, plus the last 45 seconds where Pollard sings against himself absolutely soars. This is one of 3 singles GBV released from the record. The other 2 were White Flag and Everywhere is Miles from Everywhere. All 3 singles were released on the same day. By this point, the band were using singles to connect with their fans, rather than run records up the charts. The next song is Dome Rust.
Rust at your top. I thought you were real nice. I thought you were.
This is another lo-fi song that sounds like it could have come right off of one of the band's EPs from 1994, except that there's no tape hiss. I don't know who's playing drums, but I don't think it's Kevin Fennell. It's an okay song, but like I said before, while I love all 3 of the records the band released in this year, I think each could have had fewer tracks, and while this song's not horrible, it doesn't add much. Next up is Finger Gang. This is a pretty fun and freaky song, which makes me think of Pollard's other project, Circus Devils, not to mention one of that band's main influences, Akron's Devo. The lyrics are pretty sparse, Pollard repeating over and over again the song's title, as well as shouting, "They put the finger on you." The next song is The Challenge is Much More.
We sent our uncle over there. Told him how to dress and comb his hair.
This is a really nice song that gets Pollard back to the empathetic territory of songs like Redmen and Their Wives. Bob here writing of a senile relative who's being packed off to an old folks home. It's a place where he's learning to relearn behavior like dressing himself and combing his hair. And while Pollard has written plenty of songs about death, This one's about something found along the way, old age. Bob calls facing this reality a challenge that's nearly impossible, namely because, just like the exit flagger, it's hard to ignore. Unless you pull a Jimi Hendrix or Kurt Cobain and flame out brilliantly in your youth, the ravages of time will get you in the end. Also, the line about patience holds the key to every door is a nice bit of wisdom from a guy known more often for absurd non sequiturs. Next track is Waving at Airplanes.
I found you a place to hide, and you were running up before their eyes. The sun seems too hot for your waves.
This absolutely gorgeous Tobin Sprout song is probably his best GBV contribution since To Remake the Young Flyer. And just like that track, it's an homage to planes and flying, this time from the point of view of the ground, from someone not inside a plane but simply waving at one. Everything here just clicks for me. Sprout does some great harmonizing, there's some great bass slides, and the guitars sound really nice. The last minute of the song just stretches out and it sounds really good. Second to last song on side 1 is The Military School Dance Dismissal.
Congo feels like this. Otherwise, yes, of course we miss.
Pollard in ballad mode is one of my favorite modes, and I love anytime he sings against a piano, so obviously I like this song a lot. And while it irks me that Greg Demos, I think he's the one on the piano, didn't try for a second or third take, the rawness of the recording and the mistakes in the playing don't really detract from the overall power of the song. The way Bob delivers the lyrics against the melody is really great, and there are a few fun lines. I especially like when he writes, "None of them or all of us will fight." Pollard again preaching the solidarity that comes up often in his songs, A Salty Salute being the best example. And the nod to military school in the song's title keeps us in line with numerous other references Bob has made over the years to various branches of the armed forces. Pitchfork wrote of this song that it sounds like Pollard crooning a hunky-dory piano ballad in some Dayton dive at the age of 85. I only hope we don't have to wait that long to get more songs like this. Last song on side 1 is White Flag.
Look out to see me, I'm coming up, I got a white flag in my pocket. I think you know how I feel.
This really nice song is, for me, one of the best on the record. And even though Pollard's provocative in some of the lines, asking, "What's the agenda and what were you thinking?" this is mostly Bob putting up his hands and saying, "You win." Of course, he counters any skepticism the subject of the song might have about this by adding, "I think you know this time it's real." And just for fun, the line, "You know how I feel," also appears on The Who's Bellboy from their record Quadrophenia. In terms of when and how white flags became a symbol for surrender, it reportedly goes back nearly 2,000 years, with the first historical mention coming from ancient Rome. According to the website historyandorbit.com, the historical consensus is that white flags became ubiquitous because it was so easy to identify even in the chaos of warfare. White cloth was also very easy to come by. It's still used in modern-day warfare. It's part of the Geneva Convention and was used in the first Gulf War by surrendering Iraqi soldiers. And, of course, it doesn't have to be a flag that gets waved. Soldiers have also been known to wave white handkerchiefs, undershirts, or even socks. First song on side 2 is Skin to Skin Combat.
Secrets and sins, they are calling me in. Skin to skin combat is set to begin.
This Tobin Sprout song is the LP's longest track at 3 minutes and 43 seconds. And with its mention of combat and a soldier, Sprout keeps up the military theme of the previous 2 songs. It's a really nice track, especially at the end when Sprout, like Pollard at the end of Hangover Child, sings against himself with 2 different vocal lines. Second song on side 2 is She Lives in an Airport.
She lives in an airport, she gives little bottles to me. Frequent arrivals make my destination destiny.
This is not only my favorite and I think the best track on this record, but it's one of my all-time favorite GBV songs. It's just a lot of fun, and the fact that the group, after 20 records and 3 decades, was still able to produce gems like this speaks to just how powerful and amazing a group Guided by Voices is. One of the reasons I love this song is that it's a character song. GBV doesn't do many of those. Instead, Pollard usually serves up surreal lyrics or bits of twisted poetry. We get a lot of fantasy imagery, but not a lot of people. And this song, with its whimsical tale of a woman who, well, lives in an airport, is right up there with any of the character songs that Ray Davies wrote. Plus, it's just a lot of fun, Bob writing, "She lives in an airport, so I get to travel for free," and "Her name is Destiny, it's Destiny calling." But the song also has a number of references and allusions to marketing and advertising. Pollard writing of special offers, sales pitch jargon, faster service, crossed finger discounts, false advertising, and no money down. He's equating the "come on" from the woman in the airport with the ads and sales pitches we're all bombarded with on a daily basis. A romantic request can be just as sleazy as an offer from a used car salesman. In the end, everyone just wants you to sign on the line which is dotted. Lou Reed echoed a similar sentiment on his LP, Mistrial, writing, "You're paying a price when there's no price to pay. Lovers trust, there's no money down." And, of course, some people have indeed had to live in airports. The website Listverse, in a feature entitled 10 People Who Live in an Airport, wrote that, "An airport is not an ideal home. Unfortunately, some people have no choice but to live in one. A few simply aren't allowed to leave until their paperwork is sorted out. Others have nowhere else to go." Steven Spielberg's 2004 film The Terminal looked at just such a case, dramatizing the story of a man who was forced to live in a French airport for 18 years. Next track is Tree Fly Jet.
I want to let you know, I want to let you be, I want to feel the sky, I want to feel the sea.
I'm not a huge fan of this song, and its inclusion on the LP sort of baffles me, especially coming after one of the album's best songs. Plus, at 2 minutes and 46 seconds, it seems to last for twice that long. Next up is Waking Up the Stars.
As I'm waking up the stars, I'm wondering how it might be gleaming, standing on my toes, rocking on my heels.
This is another really nice Tobin Sprout song that reminds me of the Beatles' Blackbird. Website Chunky Glasses wrote that the song's a country-tinged acoustic romp that is the best song here, with Sprout finger-picking on his 6-string, sounding nothing like anything GBV could have ever done in their bedrooms and basements 20 years ago. It's indeed a nice and mature song, and where Waves from a few records prior documented one of Tobin's nightmares, here he's in dream territory, describing himself floating towards the ceiling and flying over fields. This usually symbolizes freedom and happiness. But then Sprout has sort of an out-of-body experience, writing that his soul goes around and down and in the process discovers things I'd never see. It's an epiphany that leaves him with yet more questions, the song ending with Tobin, despite everything that's been revealed to him, wondering once more. Next track is Up Instead of Running. Pollard's use of the vocal phrase sha-la-la in the song actually drives home to me just how infrequently Bob uses those kinds of phrases, where some singers or songwriters use a whole lot of la-la-las or ba-ba-bas to fill out their lyrics. Pollard never really does that. He's a word guy, even if he's using those words mainly for emotion or for the way they sound and not literal meaning. It's another one of the songs that the band recorded with Tob Tobias, and it sounds great, especially towards the end. It's a really fun track. The next song is Smoggy Boy. This is the record's shortest track at 35 seconds. It's a quick blast of a song. It's basically just one verse, but it's a good one, and in some crazy way it sounds like a whole song. It's like one of those Napalm Death tracks that are just bursts of noise with a shouted phrase or two. This is the GBV equivalent of that, and it works. Next track is Amorphous Surprise. This is the band in the angular punk post vein that they tried out on their first couple of records. Website The Quietest called the song a needling, repetitive throwaway that, even at 2 minutes, goes on too long. Second to last song is You Can Fly Anything Right.
You can fly anything right when you're wrong now. I know. You can fly anything right when you're wrong now.
As I've said before, I love it when Pollard sings against just an acoustic guitar, so I love this song. It's just a great track that sees Bob in full-on singer-songwriter mode. The title, while yet another GBB allusion to flight and planes, also seems to be a bit of an homage to the 1943 Nat King Cole classic, Straighten Up and Fly Right. The lyrics see Pollard be both cynical and sweet, writing, I'll respect you when you're number one, an echo of My Kind of Soldier, where he'll only offer praise if the soldier wins. But then later in the song, he's more forgiving, proclaiming that they'll still love you if you drop the ball, and adding that if you think so and will it, it's your night. This is the Robert Pollard version of The Power of Positive Thinking. Last song on the record is Everywhere is Miles from Everywhere.
Everywhere is miles from everywhere. No discernment, distance A to Z.
This is a really great song and a perfect last track for the LP. Remember that it was one of the 3 singles from the record. Website Chunky Glasses said of the song, Buck bringing closer, Everywhere is Miles from Everywhere, is the most REM-sounding material GBB has laid down on tape since their first EP, Forever Since Breakfast, way back in 1996. It's indeed pretty jangly, and it's nice to see that sound didn't completely disappear with Doug Gillard. The lyrics harken back to the eponymous royalty of the opening track, with Bob writing, There is no fornication, no consent, nor king. And the title itself is a fun Pollard phrase that is, I suppose, technically true. If you think about it, everywhere really is miles from everywhere else. It reminds me of what Buckaroo Banzai always said, wherever you go, there you are. And where we find ourselves now is at the end of this record. Okay, that's it for the show. In 2 weeks, we'll be looking at GBB's 19th record, English Little League. It was the only album the band released in 2013. Fucking slackers. Until then, subscribe to the show, leave a review, and God bless the Monument Club.
Diss on the sex list. The new drunk